I'm Travis Saunders, and the 1002nd album is The Color and the Shape by the Foo Fighters.
Hi, I'm Jeff Steven, and you're listening to the 1002nd Album podcast. I spent 10 years going through the 1001 albums you must hear before you die, and now I'm asking people that are important to me all about the albums that are important to them. Enjoy! This is the 1002nd Album podcast. I'm Jeff Steven, and I'm particularly excited for today's show because my guests today, there are people who can jog, there are people who can juggle, but there are very few who can do both at the same time with such proficiency. Perhaps the fastest joggler I know, a good friend and professor in PEI. Please welcome Travis Saunders.
How's it going, Jeff?
Oh, life is good. Life is good. So the album today is Foo Fighters, The Color and the Shape. And to start with the obligatory origin story question, was this your Foo Fighters entry point?
Yes, it definitely was. I know that their first album, the Foo Fighters album, was a couple years before that, right?
Yeah, that's right. The self-titled, I think it was 95.
And I still have I've listened to like the big songs off that, but I still don't know if I've ever listened to that album front to back. So yeah, this was definitely my entry point
for the full album experience.
Yeah,
very nice. And the I guess, which leads to the question, if the first one didn't quite get the immersion, and given that Dave Grohl has done so much over the last several decades, what was it about this album that really stands out for you?
Well, I mean, so this album came out when I was like in grade 7 or 8, and so it was honestly it was just that I listened to a lot I listened to the big songs in junior high, I guess, and then I got into the whole album in university. So it was I was at Legion Track and Field Nationals in Prince George, and Monkey Wrench was really popular. And a guy on my team, Louis Rene Robichaud, which is the most New Brunswick name you could possibly have in the world, he had the album, and so I was listening to it on my Discman a bunch, like in the tent at the track where we were just sitting around killing time. And I just really liked Monkey Wrench. And then it was like a while later when I realized that he was the guy from Nirvana, because I had really liked Nirvana as well.
That's right.
And so then it just kind of, I really liked, like Everlong and Monkey Wrench and the big songs from it. And then I think it was in undergrad when I was just running all the time. I needed stuff to listen to, and that was when I kind of got into like the actual whole, like the rest of the album beyond
beyond the singles.
Exactly. Yeah.
But if you're only going to listen to a few tunes, those are pretty good ones to focus on. So
they're really good. Yeah, they're really good. So it's like Monkey Wrench, My Hero, and Everlong were like the 3 songs that I knew, and then I listened to the rest. And it's funny, there's a lot of albums like this that I didn't listen to growing up, but were in my wheelhouse, and so I got into them like in my 20s. Like Weezer was the same, and like like there were a number of bands like that like I knew 1 or 2 songs, but then really got into the full album when I was like 23. This was one of them.
And I think there's something to be said for, it's almost like making up for lost time, because I was that exact same with Weezer, where I knew the videos. The Buddy Holly, of course, was legendary, but I don't think I actually got the Blue album till 4 years later. And then so once I did, it was just, there was no turning back, because it's like, oh my goodness, where have I been for the last however many years? So I could see that happening with Foo Fighters too, where if you knew the singles for a few years, but then all of a sudden you hear the rest and you're like, oh, well, this is fantastic.
Yeah. Although ironically, that didn't extend to any of the other albums. This is the one album that I have that I've like listened to all of it, and then the rest, like I know they're like all of their singles throughout the years. But I didn't get into any other albums from them, which I don't know why.
Fair enough. And I've been like that with groups too. Of course, the one that always comes to mind for me is the Darkness, where I adore their first album.
I didn't even know they had more than one album.
Oh, they're up to it might be 6 or so since then. Right. But just because that first one was so memorable for me, I just, for whatever reason, never gravitated beyond that. So
that might have been one of the last CDs I ever bought, was that, that album. Like that, or like I remember buying 2 or 3 CDs in like 2005.
Yes.
And that was probably the last time I ever bought an actual physical CD.
Nice. And the Discman has that was at the track meets has been tucked away since then, probably as well. And so,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and even for that, like when I got into this, it was like when I finally got an iPod and like had it on my iPod and listened to it just again and again and again on long runs was when I first got into this. Yeah.
Nice. And it was somewhere in the ballpark, I think, of 45 minutes or so. So a good running length album too at that.
Yeah, you can plow through. And that was in my days when I was running like more. I was running a lot. Yes. And so I would like listen to like this front to back and then like Pearl Jam, Rearview Mirror, like the greatest hits album front to back. And that would be my my run or something.
Nice. I think that would be ambitious for me to try to do that these days, but there was a time. Exactly.
And actually I think Rearview Mirror might be a 2 CD set. So yeah,
right.
Might be, make a day of it.
A couple of kilometers in there. I like it. But I should note though that admittedly for me, Dave Grohl is a bit like, do you remember the movie Zoolander?
Yes.
Yes. So of course, one of the iconic speeches from that was Hansel's like award ceremony nomination speech where he says that Sting would be another person who's a hero. The music that he's created over the years, I don't really listen to it, but the fact that he's making it, I respect that. And that's sort of a quote that's really resonated with me over the years for people like Dave Grohl, where it's like, oh yeah, he's somebody that I really respect, but have I really listened to a lot of it? Maybe not so much. So yeah. I do have you to thank for getting me to really listen to the music of someone I do admire. And you mentioned the big hits right off the bat, like Monkey Wrench and My Hero and Everlong. Did anything else sort of jump out of the track list for you in more recent listens?
Yeah, so like I think Everlong is still probably like one of my 1 or 2 like favorite songs. Yes. Period. So that one's always good. And I saw it, and it's being from New Brunswick, like there, especially growing up when I grew up there were not a lot of big bands. Like, so to give you an example, the bands that came when I was growing up, Weird Al Yankovic was supposed to come on his Alapalooza tour and canceled. I had tickets. I was very upset.
Understandably.
Moxie Fruvis, I can't remember if they did come or if they also canceled, but that was another one that I was disappointed in. And then Green Day came, but my parents wouldn't let me go because I was like in grade 4 or 5.
Fair enough.
And then Shania Twain came and Jan Arden came. Like those are the 5 or 6 like big name concerts that ever came to Fredericton.
Yes. And Jan and Shania did show.
She did, yeah. Oh, and I was upset, and my dad was like, "Come on, she's a much bigger star than Weird Al Yankovic." But as like an 11 or 12-year-old, I was really way more into Weird Al.
You wanted to hear Jurassic Park and Frank's 2000-inch TV. And,
exactly. But so all this to say, like, so moving to Calgary, I actually got access to like going to real concerts. Yes. And so the 2 or 3 I went to were like Foo Fighters, Pearl Jam, Coldplay, which is a bit of an odd fit.
Hey, they put on a good show though.
They put on a good show. I think the Strokes, and that might have been it over 4 years, but like so this was around that time that I was getting into them, like listening to the album. Then they came to town, and all this to say that Everlong live was like just amazing, and so that's why I've always really loved Everlong. In terms of the other songs, I think my favorite other ones on the album are like I kind of like all of them. Yeah. But I like that they're all kind of different. Like there's a good breadth on the album. Yes. But I really like Up in Arms.
Up in Arms.
Just because it's weird. Yep. Like it's just the same. Because if I'm not mistaken, like it's basically just the exact same verse twice. Like first is just kind of like a mellow kind of, I'm not sure it's quite acoustic, and then just like an upbeat, like much more like up-tempo version.
That's right. They do pick up the pace. That's right. The second part there. You're right. Yeah.
And it's basically just the same verse, I think, right? Like it's just the same song twice. Yeah. And so I really like that kind of contrast. Sure. I always like really up-tempo stuff that's more kind of energetic. And so I just kind of, I don't know. I haven't heard many other songs like that. And then I think probably February Stars I like, and like New Way Home, like the last song on the album. Yeah. So like I like a bunch of them, but I really like Up in Arms. And it's also just so short, it feels like. It's just kind of like, it's kind of like an amuse-bouche. Like I'm like, oh, I really like this, and then it's done. You know, like it's so short.
Yeah. And I felt that a bit with the opener, like he always got that distant voice on Doll, like right off the bat. And then, but just as it feels like the song's about to get going, it's like, okay, we're done that, and it's on to Monkey Wrench. And so it's just that sort of like a song fragment or that sort of thing, and then on to the next. And you're totally right, where it didn't feel like they were writing to a formula by any means. How they'd have a song like My Hero that had the huge percussion, but then the next song, See You's kind of like carnival-y, like
it's a weird mix of songs.
But which is good though, because it keeps you guessing, and it's not necessarily just, oh, I know exactly it's Foo Fighters, therefore it sounds like this. And so it it kept us guessing, which is good.
And I do feel like Monkey Wrench, like that was the song that hooked me when I was. It's funny because like Smells Like Teen Spirit, before I had any idea who Nirvana was, I was like, this song's amazing, I got to find out who these people are. And then same thing with Monkey Wrench, like and this is, you know, obviously like in the 90s when it was hard, like you had to ask around, like who was that song you heard, and like, do you know that song, who does that one? But I just like how it gets progressively more intense till he's just screaming the last verse. I've always
last thing.
So it was a really good pre-race song when you're like warming up on the track and trying to like get amped up, because it's very like it's just so it just builds to such a high intensity.
I like that. I hadn't thought of it being like a pre-game or a pre-race thing, but it would definitely work in that context for sure. And for me, like I love in Monkey Wrench too how it has those delayed hits, like how there's the riff going, it's like do 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 do, like it always sort of like pauses just longer than you think it will, and that sort of delayed hits I think is just a really nice touch there. And have you heard Rick Astley's cover of Everlong?
No.
It's funny, like it's funny, you wouldn't think those two would pair up neatly, but he does an acoustic version of it. It's actually, I really liked it. I thought it was really good. And then they pulled the Rick roll on their own fans as well, where they brought him out to a concert and the band, so as a really rock version of Never Gonna Give You Up. And so and Rick was there performing with them, so it was really, really well done. So
that's funny. I do appreciate, like, I mean, Dave Grohl, I don't know how old he is, like must be in his mid-50s now.
It'd have to be.
Well, I mean it was like what, like 91 when Nevermind came out. So that's a long time, and to still enjoy performing, and he seems to have a lot of whimsy and like, you know, like pulling kids up on stage to do I think it was like in Edmonton or something, he pulled a kid up to do a Rush song and like just different stuff that he seems to still really enjoy himself, which is impressive.
That's right. And you definitely I get that sort of, what's the joie de vivre and their videos too. Like you mentioned Everlong, which I think might be one of my favorite videos of all time too, where the hand just keeps growing and slapping. And then the other one, like Big Me, Learn to Fly, just there's so many classics in there. Would it be fair to say, like with the Foo Fighters, like obviously the album's good on its own, but are the videos a key part of it as well?
No. So that's the question. Like, no. And it's funny because like I really like Big Me, like, because that was such a funny, like, taking the piss out of Mentos, so that was funny. And especially because Nirvana always seems so like serious and ironic, you know, like like it seemed like such a departure. Because even when so the song In Bloom by Nirvana is the song that's like in the back of my head most of my life, like most of the time going back to university. Like if I just have something in the back of my head, it's usually that.
It'll be In Bloom.
And I watched the video again the other day, and it's just like, it's a cool video, but like it's still just like very serious. And then to jump to then the videos he started putting out for the Foo Fighters are typically like, a lot of them are really silly. And so so I really like Big Me, but then like Everlong, like I remember the video, but I always found it a little bit off-putting, like the weird perspective of it and stuff.
But that's great though, that it can still be an all-timer of a song for you, where the video doesn't actually enhance it at all. If anything, it takes away or detracts.
And honestly, I'm not a big music video guy, and like, because you're a couple years older than me, so by the time I was like in junior high, we were already transitioning to like cribs as opposed to like video. Like there were very few videos left on. And so that might be a part of it. And even like was it Learn to Fly
with Tenacious D showed up in that one.
But again, like all I remember is him like on a plane And I just remember being like, oh, this is kind of silly. Yeah, but and again, that's a song that like is so completely different than like Monkey Wrench. Like it's just the breadth of the band I always find and then like they're still good. It's not like they did breadth and it just got weird, or annoying. Like it's still like he can pull it off, which is impressive.
Yeah, absolutely. Where it's not like, oh, you really should focus on this one sound that you actually do well. Like it's good for you for trying the other things, but stick to that. No, they definitely do several things well. And same thing with how Everlong went right into the like very gentle walking after you, like how just it has that real emotional high, but then just brings it right down, but it's still effective.
Yeah. Now, so like I think more recently it seems like when they perform, at least on a lot of shows, it seems like Dave really focuses on like the acoustic version of Everlong as opposed to like the original version. So I'm curious, have you heard the acoustic version, and which do you like better? Because it's
if I have, I definitely haven't heard it nearly as frequently.
No.
So so I think I've probably heard it at some point, because they had a whole acoustic album at one point. And
was that Sonic Highways or
I can't recall, but I know the original, it just has just the build-ups with the whole band I found so memorable.
Exactly.
It would be tough to replace that, I think.
And that's the thing, like it's a really good acoustic song, but that's the thing I miss too, of like I really like it when they kind of build up in intensity.
Yeah, for sure. But that's fantastic though, because there's some artists where like something like Guns N' Roses, where like those videos ended up being so memorable for like a song like November Rain feels strange without the wedding video and Slash playing in the desert. But that's neat to hear that they don't necessarily take it to the next level for you with Foo Fighters, and the audio just stands alone just fine.
Yeah, and I think probably because the way I got into it, like I said, was listening to it like in grade 8 at a track meet, and then listening to it over and over again while running. So it's sort of that. Yeah, it's just like latching onto the songs that stood out as opposed to like the video.
That's right. I like it. So I guess the sort of summary question then would be, why would you say The Color and the Shape is the 1,000-second album that one must hear?
Well, because I'm sure probably everyone that you're gonna have on this is gonna find the same thing. That it's like it's really hard to find recent really good albums that aren't on it. I kind of thought, okay, like what are the bands I really like, the albums I listened to growing up, and it's like Green Day, Pearl Jam, Nevermind, like all the obvious ones that I'm like, okay, this is my favorite album, are already on there. Which I think says something about the people, about the type of person that made the list. Potentially. And not, but yeah, so that was one thing that I was kind of surprised. I was surprised that this album wasn't on the list and that their first album was. And I kind of get why. Like I get that it was kind of a seminal album that people talk about, but there wasn't, aside from Big Me, were there any really big big singles off that first album?
A couple singles. I don't know if they'd still be as big, but I'll Stick Around was, I think, the lead single from it. And This Is a Call, Alone and Easy Target. So there's some good songs, but nowhere near like, I haven't looked at any of their set lists recently, but I'd imagine there probably aren't a ton that they pull off the first album live anymore. And I'd imagine, like, because the criteria for the original 1,001 list that I went through was they had that sort of the ones you must hear. So even though I'd probably agree with you that this one's note for note, this one's probably stronger than the first one, but I bet you it's on the list because it was the one after Nirvana. He sort of did the do-it-yourself where he played all the instruments, wrote all the songs and that sort of thing. So it's probably there for the significance rather than the individual excellence of it, I'd imagine.
And that makes sense. And so and I guess like so in terms of why I picked it, was, I mean, I see them as being one of the more important bands of the past 20 or 30 years. And I think it was like Alan Cross, one of his shows, talking about how like, there's very few stadium rock bands left, and the ones that are left are all mostly bands that are in their 40s and like they're the bands that are still there as opposed to new bands. Like the Killers are really big, but even they're not like they're not doing what Pearl Jam and Foo Fighters are probably in terms of big stadiums. And so in terms of like probably the biggest album by one of the biggest bands, and like Everlong is just such a good song. Like the good songs are really good, and all the other songs are still good. And yeah, so those would be the kind of the simple reasons that it was the best album that I could think of that wasn't
Yes.
on the list. Aside from, as I mentioned, I thought long and hard about like Big Shiny Tunes too,
Yes.
which is a fantastic album.
That's
And
right.
I still get excited when we were in Ottawa at Christmas with Live 88.5.
Yes.
Which is basically now an oldies station, but it's because it's all the songs from when I was like growing up.
Yes.
But I think in like a 6 minute or in like a 6 song set, like 4 songs out of those 6 were from Big Shiny Tunes too.
Perfect.
On a weekend, and I was like, it's another one, like Holly McNarland. Like, you don't hear a lot of her these days.
You know? But they had the CanCon there, which is good. So.
Yeah. And so anyway, so I will have to say that I think this is a better album than Big Shiny Tunes too. I think it is
but that will always have a place as well, because it's that sort of like, well, that would have been probably somewhere in the 96, 97 range as well. Or
yeah, I remember listening it to a lot, like in Pee Wee, so it would have been like 97, 98.
Yeah, nice. And so probably some Econoline Crush and Tea Party and that sort of thing in there.
Yeah,
so.
I'm Mother Earth.
Yeah.
Yeah, and probably I got to assume that Our Lady Peace was on there.
Yeah.
I would assume. Blur, Prodigy.
Yeah.
I think Bush X. I think Swallow might have been on there.
I think they still had to be called Bush X at that point as well.
Yes. But do you have listeners from outside of Canada?
No, I gather they've settled. Like they've worked it out, and they can now go as Bush in Canada as well. And so years after the fact, it's Gavin and company can tour as Bush now.
And so so it was there was another band in Canada called Bush. So in Canada they were Bush X, but everywhere else in the world they were Bush.
They just played all Bush, yeah. And I gather there's other ones like that too, like a band Suede, I think in Canada had to be called the London Suede, or there's all these sort of like little fine print if there was a copyright. And I gather, from what I understand, it wasn't that necessarily Bush, the Canadian one, and Bush, the British one, were, at odds with it, but it was more just the labels involved and the management involvement, rather than the bands being particularly fussy about it. So no, that, and I'd imagine that would have been the razor blade suitcase era for Bush. So
and that was that on the
no,
because that was another one that I was considering, because that's another great album.
Surprisingly, they didn't make the cut at all. So there's a few in there, and no Weezer on there either. No
Weezer on there.
No Weezer. No Blind Melon. No, like there's a few of them in there that just surprisingly, I would have thought they would have been on there, but I suppose all the whole point, I guess, of those lists as well is to sort of generate that discussion of what do you agree with, what do you think should be there instead, or the egregious omissions and that sort of thing. So.
When I know that you're a big like me, a down goes Brown guy, and so it's kind of like the goalies in the Hall of Fame thing. Is it like a career or is it a peak? And that's the thing. I feel like Bush, their peak was really high, but their longevity was not as much, like compared to some of those other. But Weezer surprises me, because Weezer, I mean, they're still going, and I know it's not a Hall of Fame thing. I know it's an album, but still, like I'm surprised that Blue Album's not on there.
Yes. And have you listened to the Hall of Fame Puck Soup?
No.
I guess a spoiler alert. It's that argument as to, is it the Hall of Excellence,
very good,
or the Hall of Very Good, or the more recent arguments is it the Hall of Famous? So are certain, so in the hockey example, are certain players there because they're famous? Like, should you have Paul Henderson there because it was a famous goal, or should you put the players who are just consistently excellent? So maybe that's the case with the 1001 list as well, is that there was some famous, like Britney Spears is on there because like that one album was very famous. But maybe some other artists that had an excellent album but weren't as renowned maybe didn't make the cut in that place. So that makes sense. But I'll defend the chord progression and Hit Me Baby One More Time forever, though. What a great hook in that. So that's good. I think that covers the color and the shape very nicely. I am convinced that it's worthy of being a contender for the 1002nd. And
at some point, do you revisit this, and do you choose what is the?
Good question. That is a good question that one day I'll find the answer to. But I think probably the answer is that it would change by the day. Like, I think if I listen to that, and especially if I made my decision, as Everlong was just wrapping up, it's like, oh yeah, this is a slam dunk. This is it for sure.
Right.
But then the next day I listened to one of the other selections, and then I'd say, I was just kidding, it's really this one. And so I have a feeling I'd be an unreliable source, because it would change by the day.
No, I have one last question, or I have one question for you. It's my only question for you.
Yeah.
So you like me, you're a teacher, and you teach slightly younger people than I do. But do listening to albums like this make you feel super old? Like I was saying, when I listen to music and I'm like, oh, this is a great album, and then I'm like, oh, this is essentially an oldie station because these songs are 30 years old now.
Yes.
And I find like I found this 10 years ago with my students, and now it's even more so. Like Nevermind to them is like what Rumors was to me, or like London Calling, of like, that's a great classic album that came out at some point before I was born. I don't know when, but it's like, you know, it's so old, I don't know when it came out, but I know it's good. And it's weird to me that now, like, and you know, now our students are born like 15 years, you know, after it, like,
well, and some like their birth years start with the year 20. So like this is even like the previous century or millennium. So it's just exactly. And a student actually was making a website recently for celebrating the Chicago Bulls of the mid-90s, and for me, I think that was, you know, like 10 years ago. It's like, oh no, it's getting closer to 30.
That's like me getting excited, but like the Habs in the 70s.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
No, absolutely. Though I did feel somewhat youthful when I asked someone what they were listening to, and they said Kate Bush the other day. So I was like, that I know what it is. so that was good.
But only because she's famous again.
I guess that's really the Stranger Things association. Right. It's a thought that counts, though.
Yeah.
But yes, but a huge thank you, though, Travis, for coming today. And yes, hopefully reunite in person in the not too distant future.
That sounds great.
Excellent. Enjoy the day.
Thanks, you too.
This has been the 1000 Second Album Podcast. Thanks for sharing some of your time, energy, and attention with us today. Take care.